You can try doing it the networking approach. You can try doing it the relevant experience approach. I did it more on the relevant experience approach. I think it should be a combination of the two, where you're getting relevant work experience, it's compounding, it's snowballing on top of each other. You're doing it like an initial role, a bridge role, maybe like an incoming, XYZ role, and then you're doing your summer recruitment.
All right. Welcome to Investment Banking Insights. This is the only show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of the investment banking process. My name is Alex Mason, and I'm so grateful you're here. And today, I'm so grateful to have my guest, Jason Lum, on the show. Jason, thank you for joining.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Yeah, beautiful day here in Ithaca, and yeah, just getting going for the day. How's everything where you're at? You're in Canada, right?
Yeah, I'm in Canada. It's getting colder. I think it was snowing a little bit this morning, but yeah, things are well up here.
Nice.
Trying to play
nice.
as much tennis until the season lasts.
Yeah, got to take advantage of that weather when you can.
Exactly.
But yeah, Jason, you and I got connected some time ago, so I wanted you to come on the show. You have a really interesting journey and story when it comes to finance careers, and particularly like investment banking, as well as other careers in finance. So I would love to kind of learn, if you can share with the listeners, how did your story in finance begin?
Yeah, great question. So, taking a step back, going back, I graduated about a year ago from a non-target university called the University of Ottawa. That's where I was from locally. And honestly, like, if I'm taking a look back and I've been reflecting on this, like, my career trajectory has really changed about 4 times at least. Initially, I thought I was going to become a civil engineer, and then my mom encouraged me to take an odd accounting class in university. And then I studied accounting at U Ottawa, like I mentioned. And initially, after my first year, went down the accounting route, worked in the government with an accounting role, and then I networked pretty early on and landed a PwC second year summer internship in insurance, which I thought was my dream role at the time. And then afterwards, I quickly realized, well, like, accounting is not really what it's made up to be. And that's where I tried to dabble my feet into more so finance. And specifically, like, one of the club presidents, once again, we go to non-targets. She actually broke into RBC investment banking after her second year PwC internship, and that was really an eye-opener for me. It's like, well, I'm doing the same PwC internship. We're part of the same clubs. We're both pretty intelligent. Perhaps I could make the same leap. And then that's where I really started kickstarting my journey in terms of, I was like, okay, how do I break in? I started obsessing over it, really. I am an ambitious person, and this was really my next goal in terms of facilitating that process. But, something we can dive into a bit further is, it wasn't just a clean transition necessarily from PwC to investment banking. I did quite a few different roles within finance. Some were bridge roles, some were roles that I was just also interested in that helped me get into investment banking eventually. So, as an example, did Deloitte M&A advisory. That was quote unquote my bridge role. I then did a boutique private equity firm, a larger asset management company, and then I worked at investment banking at CIBC Capital Markets under an M&A team. So that's generally how I got more and more inclined and interested in it, and that's also how I started just stacking more and more experiences on my, resume or CV, especially as a non-target.
Yeah, that's great. So you really were able to kind of get a lot of different experience, it sounds like, over a relatively short period of time too. So I want to understand the story a little bit. When you were in accounting, and then you said, you went to a non-target, and you saw this person who broke into RBC, and that kind of inspired you, it sounds like. What is it about the world of finance, and specifically investment banking, that made you think, hey, like, I want to do this as opposed to what I'm doing right now?
Good question. I think my motivation sort of evolved as I went throughout the process, but in terms of my limited knowledge at the time when I thought of investment banking, I thought, initially I'd say what drew me was, you can nominally work, a few more hours than Big Four. maybe, from like 60 to, 80, 100, whatever on a busier week, but for literally 2 to 4 times the pay, starting off pretty early on. So I was like, okay, A, that's interesting, that's intriguing. B, the nature of the work. I realized accounting is very repetitive. It just seemed very boring, whereas finance itself seems much more fast-paced, much more interesting, and you're working on larger deals, etc., as opposed to what I was doing. So that was the second reason. And I'd say the third reason is just more so the opportunities that it could open down the road. Obviously, exit opportunities, whatever. I didn't know what those were going to look like at that time. Now I have more clarity, but really it just opens so many more doors having that, stamp essentially on your resume, as opposed to just sticking in an accounting, very slow, steady path, which I felt wasn't necessarily was the best fit for me when I'm someone who's always looking for like that next venture or the next thing and trying to push the limit in terms of what I feel is attainable.
Okay. So you saw obviously compensation, that's attractive, and you saw the nature of the work,
It
fast
was more so,
paced.
yeah, like, well, initially
Yeah.
it was like the compensation to work hour ratio, or like the earnings potential to work ratio that I felt, which significantly out compared or uncompeted a big four career path, where if you become partner, 10, 15 years, that's only really where you're going to make some chunk change, whereas in that process it's pretty arduous and you're still working pretty long hours, obviously not IB, but it just didn't seem to make sense or didn't add up.
Yeah. No, I hear you there, and I think that's definitely a common attractor for many people who are working in accounting roles like yourself, or even in other types of roles, and they kind of see that like, oh, this is something that could be really beneficial. But can you talk about once you made that decision, like, yes, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for this role. And let's talk specifically about the banking role. What are some
Yeah.
things that you did? What are the steps that you took from your position?
So how did I break into it? What were some of the paths? What are some of the things I did tactfully to
Yeah,
break
like
in?
what was step one? Like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. What do I do? Did you have a mentor guiding you? It sounds like you were part of a club where you had at least some mentorship, but what were the things that you did?
For sure. That's a sort of a loaded question. But A, just transparently speaking, I did not have much support at all going forward. Like, as I mentioned, there was the club president. She inspired me. I met with her once just to get a sense in terms of why she made the transition, if she feels like it's feasible, etc. But once again, taking a step back, we went to a non-target. This was about 3 years ago. So she was probably one of the first people who actually successfully broke in, even out of all the finance people, etc. Our school, career center was, very cookie cutter like most. And then even the clubs themselves, like they weren't really placing people in these roles. So frankly, I just sort of took it in my own hands and I was like, okay, well, this is my goal. This is my ambition. Like I did with most things when I was younger, I just started, creating a plan and really just started grinding it out. Like in terms of what it looked like, in terms of on a weekly basis, for instance, I had quite a few different things. So, A, I was strong academically, so I was spending a lot of time at school and projects. Secondly, extracurriculars. I was also working part-time. And then all my other spare time was really just devoted to trying to learn more about finance and investment banking and technicals and networking. So, unfortunately, yeah, I didn't have like someone who could have really provided me like a roadmap from A to B to C to Z. It was more so me just trying to get a better grasp of these things on my own and independently. And that is one of the regrets I had looking back. But in terms of how I broke in and really my competitive advantage, what I focused on, Alex, as I mentioned, was I felt I couldn't necessarily just go right away, or I didn't necessarily want to just go right away from PwC to IB. I wanted to try a few different things as well. Investment banking is just what I thought I wanted to do, but I was obviously interested in other finance career paths as well. And frankly, I felt like I needed to get more experience anyways because of the fact that I was in accounting and because I went to a non-target. So my main thing is I was looking at like people's, profiles from Ivy, from Queens, which are more of the target universities up in Canada at least, quote unquote the Ivy Leagues. And a lot of the people, they had the school name, maybe they had the connections, but they frankly didn't actually have much relevant experience. And that's where I felt like I could shine. And as I mentioned before, that's where I then looked into, Deloitte M&A advisory and then other roles within finance, asset management, PE, etc. before making the jump, which was actually pretty seamless for me at the time when I actually did start doing IB recruitment. And I can get into that a bit further. But really, when I had that foundation, when I already had the walls, etc., it was just a matter of sort of putting the roof on top, and all the pieces or all the stars were sort of aligning nicely throughout that process.
Nice. And you mentioned earlier you kind of had this M&A advisory role, which you referred to as a bridge role. Could you explain that concept a little bit? Some of the listeners might not be as familiar, and kind of talk about the importance of that for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, it is what it sounds. So let's just say you're at one point, you're trying to cross, let's say, a river. It's very unfeasible, perhaps, for you to just jump over it, or for you to use a rope. Perhaps you actually literally need to create a bridge, which will take some time, but will help you actually transverse the challenge that you're trying to get to. Otherwise, it would never be feasible. So when I looked at my profile, I was like, okay, non-target accounting, have a few accounting internships, PwC, whatever. I felt like if I was going to compete or really have a good chance at this, I didn't feel like I was ready per se. And once again, I was only in second year, so I thought I could get more experience before that. And then the bridge role, I felt, is a way in which I can easily transition from a big four accounting role into a more corporate finance role, right? So similar companies, just different role, and then have more tangible credibility and hands-on professional experience that I can showcase to finance employers and showcase, hey, I am interested in going from accounting to finance. Look at these steps that I've taken, and improve my track record that way. And I did it with Deloitte M&A advisory. That led to other roles. And then by then, it already started snowballing in terms of the repertoire and the experience I could showcase when I was doing IB recruitment.
Nice. And so I love how you kind of just built your resume over time, right? And that's kind of how it works, is you don't necessarily just make this huge leap necessarily. And it can take some time, but it's definitely very doable, and you're proof of that. So once you were ready to go into IB, you had these other roles under your belt. How did that process look for you? Was there a certain strategy that you used? How was the networking? Obviously, now you have these new things on your resume, and that's bolstering you. You have, I'm sure, new stories you can bring up in your interviews. But what were some things that you did to actually land the IB role?
Yeah, as it goes back, I think the main thing for sure was, I think there's two main pieces to it, but really my main competitive advantage was getting the relevant experience, and that took time. My first year summer internship, I got an initial role. That's extremely important, right, for all students, I believe. Getting that first experience is even if it's not IB, obviously, it's just like your first one, can be one of the more challenging things because you have nothing to show for. You're competing with second year students, third year students, etc. for your first internship. But thank God I was able to land that early on, and then from there I did the next ones. So frankly, when it actually came to IB recruitment, I didn't even have to do networking. And I actually have a few funny stories that we can dive into in terms of how the actual process went. Including missing the superday and having to reschedule that, and also, changing the group that I wanted to do, etc., which is an interesting story we can get into. But really, when I even got into that position, I already had the experiences. So frankly, if I remember, I already had, PwC, the government role, Deloitte M&A advisory, a boutique PE internship in an asset management company. Funny enough, I already found what I was actually interested in from those experiences, which was more on the real estate PE or investment side. As I mentioned before, I thought I was going to become a civil engineer. I love building things. I didn't even realize that was a niche within finance, like commercial real estate investments. So at that point, my career transition actually changed, and I was like, hey, I'm not even interested in IB that much. If anything, it would have to be real estate investment banking. But longer term, real estate investments is what I want to do from at least a corporate standpoint. I thought initially, once again, that changed a bit. I knew it for sure. I always wanted to do it entrepreneurially. My family's sort of in that space. But going back to it, so really, I submitted an application for CIBC. I had to do something for my summer internship. I did an 8-month internship before, and I went on vacation and then didn't do any networking. Randomly got an interview, and they were saying, "Hey, by 5 p.m. on this day, you have to confirm your attendance." I was on vacation, so the next day I only saw it, and then I replied to the email, and by then I was like, "Okay, well, I'm assuming I'm not going to get this interview." Like I didn't respond back. Was sort of bummed out at the same time, didn't really care at that point. And then they're like, no, it's okay. We can still schedule an interview. So mind you, I didn't even do any networking. I just submitted an application. I got it. And then did the first round interview. We can get into that a little bit. And then there's a few other things that came out throughout the process. But really, for me, is having the professional experience lined up already and having the technical knowledge that I really went through, like through a trial and error process where I was already interview ready. Although the only caveat is I didn't actually network 5B specifically, although I did have to network for my initial roles when I didn't have that track record or experience. PwC as the main one there in terms of how I got in early. But really had the professional experience. That was my gateway towards IB. Didn't have to do much networking for that role specifically.
Nice. Okay.
Mind you, I already had decent grades, extracurriculars as well. So I looked pretty good on paper.
Great. Yeah, and that's awesome, Jason. It sounds like, people may hear this and be like, what? He didn't have to network. And I think that's important to highlight because it sounds like, yeah, it can happen where, in a way, your body of work can start to speak for itself more so. And people can look at the names on your resume, your work experience, they can see your grades, they can see everything and start to give you more credit for your credibility. Right. And so sometimes, yeah, maybe you can kind of get right into that interview phase without necessarily having to do a lot of networking. And I think that's a great example. So that's awesome. I think a lot of people don't have that experience. But usually I think in those cases, there are maybe younger candidates who just simply don't have a lot of work experience or academic experience yet. And so that's great that you highlighted that. I'd love to zoom in a little bit, Jason, on the interview process. Kind of once you got into the CIBC interview process, you said you missed the super day or something like that. Like,
yeah,
I got to know that story.
So, as I mentioned before, I was working at a real estate investment company. This was like probably the first week of my internship in September. And this is when they were doing like recruitment like 12 to 4, like more like 12 months in advance, at least in Canada. Not like the crazier timelines now. But really, I got the first round interview the couple of days after my vacation, did well in it. There was one technical question that almost stumped me, but thank God I like looked at a question very similar to it. Is like an M&A accretion dilution question. It was not in those common funding question guides, etc. But they gave you like a bunch of numbers. This is the purchase price. You had to back into like things using the PE ratio and the share price to determine how many shares you're doing, etc. But anyways, got through that. Got invited to Super Day. The Super Day was scheduled for like Wednesday at around like 1 p.m. I want to say. But mind you, I was working full time at this new company, so for whatever reason, they planned an investor tour where a lot of high-level investors were meeting with our COO, CFO, etc. And me as the intern, as well as my associate, it was a rainy day. So our COO told us that we have to bring umbrellas, like 40 umbrellas, down Bay Street to provide to these investors in case it rains. The only issue is that we had like a team lunch from 12 to like 1. And then we had to do this right afterwards, which is when my interview was scheduled. So I was like, shoot, I was completely debating. It wasn't actually raining. It was just cloudy. I was telling my associate, like, oh, like, I don't think we got to do it. Like, I sort of have something else. I have another meeting. Like, I couldn't disclose what it was. So I told him I had an important meeting. But he was like, no, like, we have to do this. So I was at King Taps, which is a popular place, and I just sent out a random email like 10 minutes before the interview to the HR person. Hey, so sorry, something came up at work. I'm not able to attend the Super Day. Would we be able to reschedule it in some form? And then got back to him in 5 minutes. He said, yeah, like the MDs are all super busy. Go ahead with the second part of the Super Day. and then we can try and reschedule the first part, but I don't know if we can. And then once again, like, I was just like mixed emotions, was carrying the umbrellas down, knowing that I was missing the super day at that moment. And then regrouped, did the second part of the super day. It went well. And then I can get into that. And then they've somehow managed to schedule me in for the other one. But once again, like, I thought for sure, like, I've never heard of someone reschedule a super day a few minutes before and still get in. So I thought for sure, like, okay, I guess I blew the chance there, but it turned out in the end. So once again, that's an interesting story. In terms of the technical process itself, it's pretty standard. Common behavioral questions, technical, some were a bit more advanced, and then like a question about pitch me a stock and pitch me a deal that took place recently from the company. But yeah, that was definitely an interesting part of the process there.
Yeah, I think that's cool that you had this situation at work. Obviously, you weren't expecting it. You were trying to figure something out. And amazingly, the bank was able to work around you. And I think that is a testament to just because you think something might not work out doesn't necessarily mean that it won't. The thing is, Jason, you kept taking those steps to show that you were interested in completing the process. You wanted to do everything that you could to get the job, even though your boss told you to take 40 umbrellas, down the street. You were you were able to, like, hey, I'm gonna send this email. I don't know if it's gonna work, but I'm gonna actually try anyway.
I completely thought we blew it, but it got turned around in the end. So
exactly. So
and then funny enough, like, I was at work, so I had to like reserve this private meeting room. I was doing it in there. I was like bringing my calculator, my pieces of paper, etc. So, and I think I did it on my work laptop itself as well. So, anyways, everything was super well, anyways, yeah, but it worked out in the end. It was all bootstrapped essentially.
Yeah, and props to you for doing it. I think some candidates would have just kind of given up at that point and just said, you know what, I missed it. It's not even worth emailing because, banks are so competitive and blah, blah, blah. Sometimes we create these thoughts in our mind that may not actually be true. And so you followed through with that process. But Jason, I appreciate you sharing that story. Obviously, things worked out. You got the role. Can you tell me some advice that you have for candidates pursuing banking? Obviously, there's the standard stuff, right? Study your technical, study behaviorals, those kinds of things. But what do you think, especially for people who are new to this field, pursuing an analyst role or an associate role, what are some key takeaways you could share with us here in these last few minutes?
For sure. I'd say 2 or 3 points. Firstly, the earlier you start, the better. You can never be too early with recruitment. Going into university, even during my first year, I only started getting interested in at the tail end of my first year, start of the second year, which I actually think is a bit late, especially if you're trying to be serious. Now that recruitment timelines are becoming more and more accelerated, like I think RBC, is already doing their 26 recruitment starting now, which is sort of crazy. But really, once again, the earlier you plan, the earlier you can get the ducks in the row, the better. I started off actually sort of late, in my opinion. If I started off on an earlier footing or had a better vision in terms of what I was trying to do, it would have been a bit easier. Secondly, I would say, once again, because this is my personal experience, let's say you're a non-target student, maybe non-traditional background, etc. You could really pick it 2 different ways. You can try doing it the networking approach. You can try doing it the relevant experience approach. I did it more on the relevant experience approach. I think it should be a combination of the two, where you're getting relevant work experience, it's compounding, it's snowballing on top of each other. You're doing it like an initial role, a bridge role, maybe like an incoming, XYZ role, and then you're doing your summer recruitment. In that process, though, you're networking heavily for that first role, and then you're networking for that second role, etc. But once again, with the intentions of not just trying to network from nothing to IB, but networking for one role at a time that will then help you propel your career in a more linear and in a more consistent basis, as opposed to just trying to network your way from 0 to 100. So just going block by block and having roles that would make sense for each time you can do a summer internship is really pivotal. And once again, like, if you really think of it, you do have to be realistic. throughout the process, I had multiple doubts. I thought, okay, like things on the inside seem to be working. I do see the value, but once again, like I didn't know if I would get in for sure. And obviously things came up. So the last piece of advice on mine is, once again, like, had zero resources, did not have good connections, did not have good schooling, etc. When it came to technical prep or a few different other items, I realized that I just wasted a lot of time, Alex, through the process. And one of my regrets, and this is still a regret, even the fact that I got in, right? If I didn't get in, then it would have been devastating. But if I didn't, even though I got in, I still regret the way in which I went about the process in terms of the delivery, right? Like, sure, once again, getting the experiences, doing the networking is great, but when it came to studying for technicals or networking or behavioral questions, it was as if I'm a student trying to study my whole way through my semester, through like 5 courses, let's say, and I'm just going through each different textbook on my own. Like a 500-page textbook per topic. I don't know where to start. I don't really know what questions or concepts are relevant or not. I'm just flipping through like some of the key summary chapters and then the questions and answers at the back, as opposed to how a student would typically learn, which is having a professor at university teaching them week by week, breaking down the concepts, and then giving you practice questions or practice exams, right? Like, once again, I'm sure that's how you probably study more effectively, Alex, when it came to university or exams, as opposed to just trying to go through textbooks alone, right? But when it comes to recruitment, myself included and a lot of other people, we just put it into our own hands and we think that, the 400 IB questions or just learning everything on your own is the only way. That is a way to do it. Like I mentioned, I did it, but I just regret the fact that I took too many, like I went through this whole try and error process. I went around the wrong turn multiple times and I just wasted a lot of time in the process. So my piece of advice really would be get experience, start early on, and then find someone who's been in your shoes and who can relate to your struggles and etc., but who's actually broken into the roles you're interested in, whether it's IB or PE, etc., and get access to them and learn from their mistakes and learn from their strategies and get advice that way to speed up your process, right? Like, you can try going fast alone or you can go further together. And that's really what I wish I had when I was in most students' shoes.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice, Jason. It's always better if you work with someone who has been in your shoes, who can kind of guide you down that path, ideally just a couple of steps ahead of you, so they can give you that insight. And so I appreciate that answer, Jason. And kind of as we wrap up, I'd love to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners more about what you do right now. What kind of things are you doing to help students, to help professionals, kind of break into IB as well as other finance fields?
100%. Yeah, as I mentioned, Alex, like, once again, my career trajectory has changed multiple times. Thought I was going to be doing accounting, got a bunch of different finance experiences within IB, PE, even corp dev type roles when I was working at another company. And as I mentioned, like, I thought this could be better. Like, I'm sure there's other students who are in my shoes. This was, mind you, during like COVID. The economy was not great as well. There has to be a better way. And really, I started to try and solve a problem that I already had, but for other students. So my last year of university, I started something called JHL Consulting Group, where our whole goal was to help non-target students. I thought specifically just at like my university, perhaps. We now have people within Canada, US, and UK, among others, get into top finance roles specifically for students who go to non-target universities. So in the past year and a half or so, when I was even doing full-time school in my last year, as well as full-time work, I've been working on this in terms of helping students break in successfully. And we've helped over 150 plus students to date and have gotten strong placements in top banks, bulge brackets, elite boutiques, etc., in high finance roles as well. So yeah, it's been an exciting journey. I'm actually doing this full time currently, in addition to some other real estate entrepreneurial ventures. But it's been a wild ride. And once again, whenever I started something, whether it's getting that next internship or even starting this, as long as you start those baby steps and stay consistent, the payoff and the outcome or the fruit of your labor will appear, even if it's down the road. And I've seen that through every single opportunity so far. That's great. So we'll continue with that. And really, once again, our vision is to probably help at least 500 plus students in the next year or so get into top roles, whether it's Wall Street, Bay Street, etc.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Jason. I appreciate, again, you coming on the show and sharing your story, sharing some advice for people listening. And, we'll put a link to you and your company in the show notes so listeners can get easy access to that. But thank you again, and really appreciate your time today.
It was a pleasure, Alex, and it was great meeting with you, and I'm happy to connect with some of your listeners as well. See you.